Hello. So, in today's episode of Tit Talk, I am going to share about what has been on my heart for quite some time now. Um, it's my own journey around deconstructing racism within myself. And for those of you that are new to Tit Talk is where I go through and just kind of share what I've been processing and working through in recent weeks, past months, maybe even the last year, and just process it out and get it out as a means of processing. Like it's an outlet for me. And so I might be all over the place in conversation. It's a stream of consciousness type way of expressing for me. And it's called Tit Talk because, well, it's pussy church. So our tits are where our heart is. And so it's like speaking about matters of the heart, hence tit talk. And it's in pussy church because it helps other women kind of hear what's going on here in pussy church with another woman, as well as gives them a means to kind of conversate with their heart. And then maybe share in the comments and conversate with other women. So anyways, it's been on my heart for a while, deconstructing racism. And I have a lot to share and say and process on this subject. For starters, racism is a highly complex subject to unpack and talk about. It is not like, it's not about like one way or the other way being correct. There's a lot of gray in between. Um, and it's not a matter of like black and white, like there's a whole spectrum. And so as I've been doing my own work on deconstructing racism within myself that I've either picked up through society, the patriarchy, conditioning, epigenetics, known and unknown to me, what I learned in school through watching other people, um, it's just brought up so much in me. And I feel like as I watched stuff on social media, I'm really big on observing and watching and listening. And as I watch stuff, I just feel like a lot of people talk about it like they have it all figured out. And I just don't think that really is fair to do. And then I find um that at least here in the States, from what I've observed, like a lot of people make it about like skin color, and there's like this racial divide with skin color. But then a lot of people don't talk about like class warfare and like low income versus middle class versus high income, and how that can create division, and how the government has made it about skin color and people have not questioned um like the stories they're being fed, the narratives they're being fed, and people don't necessarily know like the history of the country because history over here is not taught accurately, right? And then with that said, it's also like, okay, like not everybody comes in with the same soul missions and same soul programming to work through. So not everybody in life is going to be working through racism. Not everybody in life is even going to be aware of racism. However, there are going to be those that do come in with that and they do want to work on that on a collective level. And it's really important um, to not like get so caught up on being right about racism that you like invalidate another person's work that they're doing on racism, or like just their own existence in a way. Um, and so, yeah, the more that I've started doing shadow work and looking at where I've had racist tendencies in the past, or where I've racial profiled, or where I've been racially profiled, it's just really interesting because like when I first went into it, I guess I had a bit of like the martyr complex, or like the savior complex, or um being inferior and less than because of my abandonment wounds and wanting people to love me. And so when I went into it, it's like I completely self-abandoned in some ways and just like snuffed out my own rich cultural ancestral background, right? Like when I was growing up as a kid, I used to be so in love with listening to Celtic music and the river dance music, as my mom would clean house to it. And I loved all kinds of like Celtic folklore because that is part of like my ancestral history. And and then now, as an adult young white woman, like I feel ashamed to ever exhibit any love or fondness for my ancestral background. And that shame kind of was like illuminated within the last few months when I saw a TikTok video of this Black man that went to visit Dublin, and he was so excited about Dublin and so in love with it. And it just lit me up and reminded me so much of how I used to love like learning about my Irish background as well as my Scottish background and my German and Scandinavian background. And then I was like, dang, like you got so perfectionistic in your self-healing game around like deconstructing racism that like you oppressed yourself. Like, whoa. Um, and so then I had to kind of work through that and look at that and sit with that and decide for myself, was it worth talking about? And it was because I've seen a lot of people bash white people and white women um for like their maybe ignorance around the topic of racism or around skin color, but then also for like their own like ancestral background. And I used to allow myself to take that bashing. But then as I started doing work around like cultural appropriation, which falls under the umbrella of racism, like it's a huge topic. Racism's huge. There's so many facets to it, right? Um, I remember I really like kind of got upset because I mean, I do energy healing and energy work. Like that's my sole purpose. That's my passion. I love that kind of work. And when I first got into it, I didn't know as much about my ancestral background as I do now. And so then I was beating myself up because like I would use a feather as I would fan sacred smoke around the body and cleanse the aura. And while it was brought to my attention that I could do that through another white woman who was a Reiki master that attuned me, who um, allegedly had Cherokee ancestry, um, I just learned it from her and I went with it because it felt good. And then I started to feel guilty as I read people's stories about white people misusing sage and then or misusing any kind of smudge. And then as I started like understanding my background more and more, like I was like, wait a minute, like people smudge with like juniper in Europe and Germany, and people smudge with like oh, what was the other one? Was it cedar maybe overseas? And I was like, wait, I'm not being culturally inappropriate. Like this is something that my cells remember from my ancestors. Um, my ancestors used like runes, which are rocks, and I mean, there's an abundance of rocks all over the world. There's an abundance of plants all over the world. There's abundance of culture all over the world. And I think sometimes people forget, um, or maybe they just purposely choose to overlook it, that when like Christianity occurred and the witch hunts occurred and um all of that in history, that a lot of white culture was snuffed out and like killed off. And there is a rich history to like um Irish ancestry, Scottish ancestry, German, Nordic, Swedish, Scandinavian. There's like all kinds of history to it, but a lot of it has been lost or buried or forgotten because of the Crusades or like Christians trying to convert pagans and killing them and killing their holidays with them, or like the witch hunts and like the people that knew about like plants and Mother Earth, and like so much of it just got snuffed out. And so it's like people talk about cultural appropriation, and sometimes I feel like it's like they don't even understand as they talk about it. They just heard the term and they talk about it. And then they forget that like white people also have a culture. And I myself forgot it. I fell victim to that. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm a white woman. I'm horrible. Like I'm taking from other cultures. And I'm like, wait a minute, what about my own rich history? Like my history, there was a history with plants and rocks and esoteric knowledge and metaphysical knowledge. And also, it's also like, I feel like a lot of the stuff that I do when I do energy work, it's not necessarily even related to my skin color. It's related to the memory of my soul. And my soul, I believe in reincarnation. I believe in past lives. And my soul remembers things that I just didn't learn here. And I didn't learn from other people. And I don't need to beat myself up or shame myself about it. However, I do need to be respectful of other cultures. And if I'm aware that it is like a tradition of someone's culture to do something, um, that I don't exploit it. Um, and so, yeah, having like that awareness. But I feel like there's so much hate in the collective and so much misunderstanding in the collective and so much animosity and unresolved trauma from our ancestors that's been passed on and exacerbated to us that a lot of people just are busy pointing fingers instead of kind of looking within and doing their own work. And I sometimes get discouraged because there's some people that are educated that go on about like skin color and racial divide, trying to like it's like they're trying to beat the system by being in the system. And it reminds me of like what my Africana studies teacher said, like you can't beat the beast system, you have to start a whole new system. And so it's like, okay, y'all are kind of like talking about the history of it to people that have like that have the privilege of education, but what about the people out there that don't have the privilege of education? And so then you're judging them for being racist or white trash or low income or whatever it may be, but then like they don't even have the tools at their fingertips that you have, which is then where it gets into like classism too, which is also like really complex. And then like, yeah, it's interesting also like unpacking racism as you talk to people from other parts of the world. Because like my adopted brother, he's from Africa, and he said when he came here, he was so surprised because he was like, well, in Africa, everybody's either black or white. That's it. And he's like, but then I made friends with a Chinese friend here, and she said she was yellow. And he was like, I had no idea that there were all these other colors because people are claiming them over here. And I was like, wow, that's so interesting to think about too. And then it's like even that's complex because then you have like Africa and African Americans, and like there's like um racism amongst people of the same color and discrimination and bias, but it doesn't get talked about. And like I don't know, the more that I do the deconstructing within myself, in a way, sometimes the more hopeless I feel because I'm just like, man, this is so layered and so complex. And so many people just don't want to do this work or look at it. They rather look outside of themselves instead of looking inside of themselves, which then just adds fuel to the fire. And yeah, it's just like a really soupy mess, it feels like sometimes. However, I keep doing the work and deconstructing within myself and gaining new like insights and understanding. And part of why I do the work is because I have some people in my life that are very near and dear to me that are people of color. And like they matter to me. And I don't want to discriminate against them. I don't want to racial profile or have racial slurs. And if they bring to my attention something that bothers them that like the larger group does, then I don't like I try not to like do that. So for example, one of my friends, like she absolutely hates when in songs they use the N word in any variation, and she talks about how hurtful it is to her. And so I just won't listen to those songs because I have love and respect for her. And um, hearing her perspective has taught me how some music can be really harmful. And then that also makes me think of like when my adopted brother and I were talking to like neighbors a long time ago, and they were saying like the N-word spelling, like Nigga. They're like, oh, it's like a term of endearment. It's like reclaiming the power of that word. But then like my adopted brother and I were like, no, like that word has so much pain attached to it. It shouldn't like be used. Like it's harmful. And like they just weren't understanding it. Of course, these people that were defending it were um not Black, they were Hispanic or brown, whatever you want to call it. So it's like, why are they even defending that word when they don't have any like historical context to it? And then there's like that whole thing of like people of color banding together. But then at the same time, like when I worked at the halfway house, I saw so many people of color like trying so hard to survive the system that they were all like pissing on each other. And like it's just like nobody can really seem to get on the same page. And the more I do my own inner work on racism, um, the less scary it becomes for me. Because in the beginning, I was scared to talk about racism. I was scared that people were going to shame me or guilt me or tell me I wasn't doing it the right way. But at the end of the day, like when you're doing this kind of inner shadow work, you're the one who has to sit with your guilt and your shame. You're the one who has to cry those tears and grieve as you realize where you haven't been the greatest human being. You're the one that has to cry and grieve for your ancestors and how they've been treated. You're the one who has to figure out a way to get that unexpressed rage and anger out of your body so that way you don't keep acting out some of your ancestral stories and narratives. And so that way you're not fighting fire with fire. Like the work is between you and your soul at the end of the day. And so people can judge you and shame you all they want. And it's just really important to um, understand and remind yourself, like, why are you doing the shadow work on racism? Why are you deconstructing racism? Are you doing it to be a people pleaser? Are you doing it to be a martyr? Are you doing it to be a savior? Or maybe you started out that way and now are you doing it because you're doing it for yourself so you can just like be a more wholesome, empowered, and loving person during this lifetime, which then helps put an input of love into the collective, which then helps other people kind of follow suit. Which the more that you put love and respect and acceptance into yourself, which acceptance happens through self-actualizing. Like when you self-actualize, like you're accepting yourself by acknowledging things that you wouldn't normally acknowledge. And this is why I did that spring cleaning video on the Pussy Church playlist about racism, to create a safe container for people to self-actualize and accept themselves free of judgment from other people. But as you do that, it helps you shed density from your energy field, from your vibration, like the density of guilt and shame and anger and rage. And as you shed that density, then you bring in more of the energetics of like inner peace, acceptance, reason, love. Like you start to bring in those energetics. And when you bring in those energetics, then those energetics are like a higher vibration. I hate using it that way, but like for lack of better wording right now, they're a higher vibration, they're more highly calibrated, and it causes others to entrain to that. It's just hard not to when you're around someone that's like in those higher calibration fields to follow suit. And so then you start doing the work for yourself, and that's really powerful. Um, and when you like share the kind of work you're doing with other people, they might not understand you or they might shut down, they might be avoidant. Um, and that's their own journey. That's between them and them, not them and you. And it's important to not take it personal and to not internalize or feel attacked. And just keep plugging away at what you're doing. And so like the way that I've been doing work on deconstructing racism, I do a ton of spring cleaning, which is a technique I learned from Mama China's virtual pleasure boot camp. It's also in her book, Pussy, a Reclamation. So powerful, so helpful. And my husband does the spring cleaning with me because we both want to leave the world more beautiful than it was when we entered it. And if we can at least deconstruct our own stuff, then that's at least a tiny bit of sparkle compared to when we came in. Um, and then we both do swamping, which is a dance practice where you choose a song for rage, a song for grief, and a song for turn on, and you somatically release from your body. So we'll spring clean, or I'll spring clean on racism, or I'll spring clean on cultural appropriation, or on Black people, on Chinese people, on Indian people, on Native Americans, on white people, on white women, white men. Like, I'll go through a whole topic because racism is like a worldwide thing, okay? Like, and there's so many like different cultures in the world too, and different countries have their own forms of racism. This is what I mean by it's really complex. Like, here in America, like, I feel like sometimes it gets oversimplified in the news because people just make it all about black and white. But really it's like so much more than that. It's like cultural too. Like, um, you can have like racial warfare, like what happened with like the Rwanda genocide, where it was one tribe against the other tribe because the one tribe was favored by white people. Um, and you can also have like what's going on with Palestine and Israel. Like, it's a race thing, it's a religion thing, it's a like makes me think of like the ally systems in the world. Like, it's a worldwide thing. It's much more than just black and white. It goes deeper, but it still falls under the category of racism, to me at least. And so understanding that it's complex is helpful too. And understanding like what you can do in your part of the field. Like, understand like where you live, understand like what the struggles are in your city and your state when it comes to people peacefully getting along and being accepting of one another. Um, understanding like how neighborhoods do get redlined, and people of color get redlined into one neighborhood, not by choice, but because people racial profile them. Understanding that, and understanding that that doesn't make them a bad person. It doesn't necessarily make it a bad neighborhood, although being that they get less privileges in some ways, it can cause for higher crime rates. But understanding that and being empathetic towards that instead of judgmental towards that. And then understanding yourself. Where do you discriminate against yourself, right? And then spring cleaning on it, reducing spring cleaning reduces the emotional and energetic charge that goes with topics. So it's really good, especially with this topic too. Like, spring clean every which direction you can multiple times. And maybe you got to take a break for a few months and go back to it. That's fine. Like, it's important to give yourself breaks and a little bit of time away from such intense shadow work and self work on such heavy topics, because if not, you're going to burn yourself out and then you're not really like helping, right? You're not helping yourself and you're not helping the collective, and you might even become kind of bitter and resentful too. Um, and then being mindful of like who you share that you're doing this work with, because not everybody's going to understand it, and it might trigger some people. And yeah, it's just a matter of like self-preservation, to be mindful of who you share with, and making sure that you're not actively, consciously behaving in a way that could be deemed as racist or discriminatory. And if you catch yourself, which you will, especially as you start doing this kind of work, if you catch yourself, making sure not to shame yourself, making sure not to bully yourself, making sure to give yourself like a hug and be like, damn, like, I can't believe I just said that. That was like me racial profiling, and I didn't realize like that was inside of me. Like, oh, I'm so sorry to the part of me that has been like displaying this behavior, thinking it's okay. Like, it must hurt to like display behavior that is not true to like the essence of my soul, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I love you. Thank you. And then sending that energy out to whoever you might have displayed it towards if you feel called to, or journaling it out and just providing yourself loving words, because not other people outside of you aren't necessarily going to be the most loving or accepting. They're going to try to relate, or they might shame you, or they might just give you the silent treatment because they don't understand or can't comprehend. Like when you're doing this kind of work, you kind of got to like be the one that has your back. Unless you have like a really awesome partner like I do, that's great too. Um and yeah, like, and then having like those honest conversations with the people in your life um that are connected to this type of work. I have a really close friend that I've had some really deep heart to hearts with about deconstructing my own inner racist, which is like an archetype to me, the inner racist. And she shared some really sad stuff with me from related to like another girl that went to high school with us and how that girl treated her. And like it made me sad for my friend, but then I also was like, wow, I'm so grateful that woman to woman we can talk to each other and be in solidarity about like progressing forward and unifying and being in sisterhood and solidarity um on such an emotionally charged subject, you know? Um and I mean, yeah, I went through years ago when I first started doing this shadow work. I went through and apologized to all of my really close Black friends, saying sorry for the racial slurs that I said in high school that I didn't even say to them. I just said them with my other friend at the time who would say them all the time. And I thought like it was like the cool thing to do. Which that friend was a person of color. She was Mexican and she would make racial slurs about Blacks. And I thought it was a cool thing to do, and I wanted her to accept me, which then goes with my Chiron wound of abandonment. So it's like I self-abandon, like I'm not racist at the core, you know, but I self-abandoned to be like loved and accepted by this girl who's like not in my life anymore and hasn't been for a while. And I would say racial slurs. And then so I had to, for my peace of mind, go back and apologize to some close friends about racial slurs that I said in high school that I didn't say to them that I just said, and I felt it was wrong of me to say. And then also like had to apologize for how I behaved in high school to some friends that I didn't even have in high school. I made them as adults. And I just felt like to have that integrity in our friendship, I needed to apologize where I could and make right where I could. And the conversations went well. They were well received. Um, and it dissolved a lot of fear and made me feel more safe and secure doing this kind of work. But it's not easy work to do. It's not for the faint of heart. And if you are doing it, I totally commend you and I applaud you. It's not easy. And also, it's also like what my brother said, which I love talking to him because he's not from here, so he has different views. But he was like, well, and he talked about how over here in the States, it's more about class than it is about skin color, but everybody's made it out to be about skin color. But he was saying how, I mean, he was like, well, everybody has like racial tendencies. He's like, because then you have like the Black neighborhoods that are like, don't go to the white neighborhood, like they're evil. And so then you have like their kids growing up with racism, and then you have the white kids saying, like being told not to go to the Black neighborhoods. And it has to do with like our upbringing and our parents' upbringing. And it goes back. And it's like, really, at the end of the day, there's no one to really point at. All you can do is point within, look at yourself, look at what you're doing as part of that problem and deconstruct it. And then that way, um, you're adding more coherence to the collective and more love to the collective and not adding so much fire to the collective. Which when you also do work on like racism, you're also doing work on your own inner battles, your own inner conflict, which with Palestine and the external conflict that is Palestine and Israel, um, like the way to bring healing to that is to look at where you do have inner conflict within. And so if you are doing work around racism and cultural appropriation and racial bias and racial profiling and white and Black and people of color, if you're doing that kind of work, you're doing a huge favor to the collective because you're deconstructing some of your own inner work or your own inner battles, which can help bring long-term peace to the planet. Maybe not right now in this lifetime, but in the lifetimes to come. Um, and if more people can do that, and if more people could lead by example, and if more people could respect one another's decisions on how they go about doing things when they go about doing things from a place of pure heart, then it can make this world much more beautiful than it was when we entered it. I think that's all I got for now. Also, it just comes to mind, like, um, just like when I talked about activism, like, there's different ways to work on racism. Um, you could do it more internal, you could do it more external, but nobody should go about shaming one another. Like, you can't fight hate with hate. You just can't. If you do, you're creating more divide, and that's not what this world needs. Um, so if one person decides to do the work on racism and they do it through going to school and getting educated on the history of it, that's cool, but that person cannot go to a person that doesn't have the same access to education as them and then shame that person for not understanding their concepts or not wanting to believe their concepts, or maybe they're questioning their concepts because let's be real, the educational system is part of the patriarchy, which has its own colonialization woven into it, right? Um, so it's like you can't go shame another person for how you're deciding to do the work. Your work is valid. It's your experience. It's part of your belief systems, but don't go invalidate another person's experience. Maybe their version of like doing racial work and racism deconstruction is like they like do it in a more human to human way, and like they just like go and apologize to their friends, and then they ask their friends about their experiences, and then they listen, and then they're like, okay, like I'm going to take this and I'm going to be more mindful in my approach in the world. Like maybe that's their way of doing the work. That's fine. Or maybe they're like, maybe they decide they want to journal and do somatic releases, and they don't really talk to anybody about it, but they're still doing the work. That's fine too. Um, all of it is relevant. All of it matters. But people just need to not go around shaming each other. It doesn't help at all. It doesn't put more love into the world. Um, so yeah. Anyways, that's what I got. Thank you for listening to this matter that has been very near and dear to my heart for a while. It's been a pleasure having this Tit Talk conversation with you. I always love to hear your stories in the comments, and part of why I share is also this is like Pussy Church. I want women to have these conversations with one another and to share their experiences in a safe container. So that way we can heal what is known as the sister wound, women being against each other. And in healing the sister wound, we also deconstruct the patriarchy as well. And in this conversation, it's like we're deconstructing the patriarchy and we're also deconstructing on racism. And that's like 2 for 1. How freaking cool is that? Pussy power. All right. Y'all be well. Thank you so much for listening. I love you. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Aho.